Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our 4-part series on developing JavaScript applications with the Microsoft Identity Platform. Today, we're going to talk about the Microsoft Graph Toolkit and some of the cool components available in that toolkit. As always, I'm Sydney Andrews, Azure MVP, Microsoft Certified Trainer, and I'm going to help guide you on this journey to becoming an identity developer. Today we have a special guest, Beth Pan. She's a software engineer at Microsoft, and she's going to really show us the ins and outs of the Graph Toolkit. Before we get started, I always like to do a couple housekeeping things. We have an email address. That's msusdev@microsoft.com. You got any questions, you just send us an email to msusdev@microsoft.com. And if we can't answer it, we'll get you somebody who can. And anytime we show presentations, we show examples, we like to put those examples up on GitHub. So our GitHub repository is msusdev/Microsoft Identity Platform Dev. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody to, again, Beth Pan. She is going to take this away and show us some of the cool stuff we can do. Beth, have fun.
Cool. So hi, everybody. My name is Beth. I work as a software engineer at Microsoft. The team that I'm on actually manages first-party, third-party partner ecosystem. And we build toolings for the Microsoft Graph and try to help developers, to do all the fun things that's powered by the Graph. So let me share my screen real quick. Do this. And then here, play. Here you go. So this is the deck that I prepared this morning. So Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the little giraffe on the right side is what we do. We like to have fun, so we put little, giraffe graph in there so that you know that that's us. So I'm gonna start with talking about what's the toolkit, and we'll go from why do people use it, who should use it, and then we'll go into details with it. So the Graph Toolkit is a collection of framework agnostic web components powered by the Graph. If you know what web components are, those we designed this to enable developers to be able to use it for any of the frameworks that you choose, whether you choose to use vanilla JavaScript, HTML, or if you want to use this within your React or Angular or Vue framework. That's the design rationale behind it. So it works automatically with the Graph without any customization required. So which means that all of our components are functional. There's already code behind written for it. I'll show you here in a little bit. It only needs 2 lines of code to start with connecting to the Graph. And it also works with any web framework, like I just said, on all the browsers. So who's it for? We built the Graph Toolkit for any developers that build on top of either it's web technology, purely web app, or if you want to build apps for Teams or SharePoint web parts that calls the Graph. So why should you use it? First thing is it really shortens your development time. It is very easy to add these UI components that access the Graph to your app with just a few lines. It's extremely flexible. Like we just said, you can use it within any framework and it works just for all the modern browsers. You could easily customize how it looks and works. We have a lot of custom CSS properties that you can use to tweak and also add your own JavaScript or C# behind the scenes if you like to. It is an open source project, so anybody can contribute to it. I'll show you at the end of this presentation how and where you can find our projects. So we'll get started by, let me just show you how to use it in your web application. So let me exit out of this. And then I'm gonna go to my terminal where I set up a demo folder. And then I'm gonna start with making a directory and just say cd into it. And then here I'm gonna make a file. Let's just call it index.html. I'm also gonna assume that you guys haven't done the app the AD registration. So we're going to show a little bit of how to register your application with Azure Directory, AAD, Azure Active Directory. And then what are the things that you need to enable for this to work? Okay. Let me open up my code editor here. Speaker. Just trying to sign into my Visual Studio. That doesn't matter. So here we have an index.html page, which is completely blank. What I'm going to do next is, if you go to my browser, Edge browser, there it is. Here. I'm just going to search default HTML page so that we show like a complete from the beginning. Let me just copy all of this and go back to my code. And then in here, I'm gonna remove both of these from the body. And then a good place to get started is if you go to aka.ms/mgt-docs, that's where all of our docs are. And here you can find, a lot of good information from getting started, scrolling down. Here will be like, how do you add MGT as part of your project? You can either use npm and then install the package at Microsoft/MGT, or for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use the script tag, and then I'm going to throw it in the head. Here, right here. Now we have MGT tagged into our project. And like I said, it only requires like 2 lines of code to start this. If I say MGT login and save this, I'm going to use live server to serve this page into browser. So it says port 5500. If I go to localhost, here you go. There's a sign in button. Magical. So what we did behind the scenes is we wrapped a lot of the authentication flows into this MGT-login component. The reason that we did that was actually we started with this component at the beginning, and the rationale behind it was we had a lot of customers and partners telling us it's very, very hard to read through all the authentication flows to make sure that we're using the right libraries for different languages. So and it's complicated for me to read through different delegation or app delegation or permission styles. So how about that you can provide us some sort of UI component that just has all these functionalities right behind it already. So that's what we did. To use all these components, you also need to make sure that you use one of our auth providers to be able to supply your app ID and the scopes and all the good stuff. So I'm going to do MGT- MSOL provider. And in the MSOL provider, what you need is give it a client ID. And normally I would just go use like one of the client IDs I already have. But for this demo, I'm actually going to go to my Azure portal and create a create a app ID just for this demo. So here's the portal. I think Sydney already showed you guys how to use or register your app with AAD last time in the first episode, but let's just go to Azure Active Directory. And let me go to app registration. I'm going to do a new registration and then just call it demo. Here's all the accounts types that you can pick. You can do single tenant, multi-tenant with MSA account. I'm going to pick the most diversified one, the last one. There might be some more configurations that you have to do. If you only pick single tenant, then you have to supply the authority in the MSOL provider configuration. And then redirect URL will just be HTTP localhost UC 5500. Yeah, let's do that. Sure. Now I have a AUD registered application ID, and before that you go further, we have to go to authentication and then check your implicit grant. This will enable the application to be able to obtain a access token on behalf of the user and then supply all the consent for the user to be able to access the graph. I think that's all I needed. Click Save, go back to Overview, and then grab this client ID, go to my app, put it right here, save it, and now we'll see what it looks like. Here, so if I click sign in, not doing anything yet. Let's see, haven't done this for a while if we're doing this correctly. So drop the source. Client ID, it has a dash in there. Now it works. So I have a profile set up right here. This is a demo tenant that I created. That's also something that you should consider, because when you're playing with the graph data, it's always good to have your own tenant, which you have permission to do all the fancy things. If you're curious how to join that, you can go to developer.microsoft.com.
And Beth, while you're doing that, is it possible for you to zoom in just a little bit on the browser?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
Oh, no worries.
So if you go to graph.microsoft.com here, there are a lot of good information for you just for Microsoft Graph in general. And I think one of these is to register. Yeah, here it is. So join the M365 developer program. Here you can create your own tenant. You can change, the email address and add your own data set for all the fancy things that you can do. But anyways, coming back to your localhost, I just connected my application to the graph with one file and a couple lines of code by looking at the documentation, and also registered a AAD application with my Azure portal in about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But there you go. And the next thing that we can do is, after you authenticated your user, what are the other things that you can do, you might ask? But we can also add, some other components. Agenda is always the one that we show, but I can show you something else as well. You can also do, MGT people picker. And after that, I just save this, I come back. The reason that I asked that the application asks you to sign in again is because we actually do incremental scope requests. So every time that you added a new component to your application, this is going to detect what are the scopes for the graph that it needs for your user. And then it's going to ask the application to sign in for that again. This is the people picker. And because I added two at the same time, now it's going to ask me, to consent for a different. Right, let me just make this smaller. A little weird. There you go. So here I can pick all the people. And the reason that it keeps prompting is because, like I said, it's incremental. And every time that we open up a new component, it has to ask for something else. So maybe I'll just remove this. Agenda has a pretty simple MGT agenda. We go to components and go to agenda. I feel like I copied this wrong somehow. I always do this in live demo that I mistyped something and I couldn't figure out what's going on with it here. It's showing up here. Interesting. Let me stop this real quick and just redo it. All right, maybe I should come back to this. Oh, I know why. Huh. So, okay, let's do this. If I open up a new tab, silly me, I've never created a agenda item. That's why it's not showing. See, every time that we do these things, I always discover something else that we need to add to it as well. If I do the Megan profile, by the way, that's one of my favorite features for using Edge is how you can use different profiles, and that's already set up. This is because I need to close this. I come back and do localhost. And sign in with my Megan account. I have a lot of different accounts here. I'm just gonna pick Megan in this one, and then copy its password and consent for my organization. Here is all of the default calendar events that you can see, and making me sign in multiple times. Anyways, maybe we introduced a new bug. Let me go back to my default browser and what I was doing earlier, and let's go take a look at this. Okay. Go back to my demo. So that's how you get started, including AAD registration and writing 2 lines of code to introduce the MGT login components and other components into your profile. You know what I didn't do? I just realized you can also set up the scope in your Azure Active Directory, and that way you don't have to always click consent for all the components that you add. Anyways, moving on. So the list of components that we've built so far, there is login, agenda, tasks, people picker, person card, channel picker, and get. I'm going to go into details into what these all do in a playground that we built for people to explore components and tweak your own code for it. Now if I click this, it just worked. This is the, make this bigger again. Okay. Shift. There it is. This is the playground that we built for developers who's interested in exploring the MGT components. Very simple URL. You just go to mgt.dev. And we have a list of components here for you. Like I said, agenda just shows your calendar events. There's a couple properties that you can use to tweak your agenda. For example, you can use the query to, this is old data ways of sorting your data. So you can do order by, start, date, time, and that's going to sort your calendar events by what you supply in the URL parameters. You can also do group by day. So this is going to give you a title of what day that we're looking at and starting from that day. You could also do how many days that you want it, and where to find all of these information is, again, if you go to aka MSMGT docs. There's a lot of good information for agenda or any other components that you're interested in looking at. If I scroll down, here's all the properties that you can supply to your web components. Here's all the CSS handles that you can use to tweak how they look like. Another good thing for the playground is outside of Canvas, there's this docs tab. This actually, the storybook itself actually goes through our code and then generate this for us. So this is from from the projects that we have. So same thing, if you wanted to look at attributes, properties, and CSS properties that you wanted to supply to your JavaScript or HTML code, here's where to find them. So going down the list, I'm actually going to go through this first. MGT people shows a group of people that you recently interacted with. You can also supply, a group ID to show how many people is within this group. You could tell it how many people that you wanted to show by supply something here, say, I want to show people by people query. I want to show presence of these people and how you want the people component to interact with the person card as well. And coming down the list, like I said, supplying, there's a lot of ways that you can manipulate your front-end component. So MGT people picker, this is kind of, we took this from inspirations from like the SharePoint community, where you can pick people that you work with from, this drop down. This is going to go into your Azure Active Directory and look at the people that you frequently interact with. There's a couple things that you could do here. You could pick people only from a certain group by giving it a group ID, like it shows here. You could do both people and groups by supplying a type that says any. You can also pick from distributed groups by giving it a group type. And again, if you want to find out, what are the group types there are and what are the types for this component, a good place to go is go back to the docs or from here. I'm going to go back to dark mode here just in a second. MGT person is where you can supply your users basic information. We have a couple ways that you can do a photo only, where it just shows this little Megan's photo. You can do, this is the default one that will give you, the name and the email address. How you would change this is to supply it with, is that briefing details? No. By supply, like the view, I don't know if you see right here, equals 2 lines or 1 line, and there's a good place to find it is we actually this is a new deployment version of the MGT Dev. I actually see a lot more stories than I used to. If you go to more examples, here we show you like what the default look like, what does 1 line look like, what does 2 line look like, what you can change the second line's content, change CSS to change the look and feel for the picture here. This is actually in one of our blog post series examples. One of our MVPs wrote this example. I thought it was a very fun way to explore how to use different properties for MGT person. And this is how you would interact, like add another component to the existing component. For the person component, you can hover over or click on it so that it will trigger another component called person card. Here's another way of doing it. So if you just add person card interactive way for click, now if I click it, this is going to show me Megan's more detailed person card information, where you can actually, this is going to trigger like a Teams that you can chat with her, email her, call her, and then there's more details for specific information that you're looking for. Another thing is you could set your own, not this, maybe it's in person card. For person card, you can set your own details in this section. So all of the above is coming from the graph, and you can use it using template. You can add more details into the person card. I think it's in samples. I'll come back to that. There's also a couple ways of doing, I think something that I didn't show is, this is new for our new 1.3.1. is we introduced Presence API into our person component. Now you can add this little badge to your person's picture so that you can see if they're offline, online, and I can show a live example of this later as I sign in as Megan. And these are all the, what's it called, presence badge and what they would look like. and when you're using a small avatar, what they would look like as well. So like I said, mgt.dev is just a really flexible place where you don't have to sign into your own account. We supply the default data for you and then show you different ways of using these components in your own web projects. Last three. Tasks is using, I think, the Outlook Task API right now. We're also thinking about merging this into using the To-Do API. If you attended Build, there was a big announcement and push towards unifying the To-Do API, and we're migrating this component into using that as well. Teams channel picker connects with the person who signed in's Teams information. So this will get like all the team or all the channels and teams that Megan is part of. So if I select this channel, you can use the relevant information from this channel and do all the other things or complete your workflow. So we've slowly been introducing dark mode into our components as well. This is something that our customers has been asking for. You know, what if my customer wanted to do a dark mode versus a bright or just normal light mode? So like I said, there's a lot of CSS custom properties that you can use to tweak the look and feel of all these components. For example, Teams channel picker has all these custom components, and all you need to do is copy this for the dark mode or change, you know, if you have a different shade of black or blue, or, you know, a slightly grayer than the white, then you can change these colors and now everything looks like dark mode. I think we have another dark mode in here somewhere, right here, for people picker. So the last component that actually makes everything very flexible is called MGT get. When we started doing MGT components, we tend to, like you said, tend to bind one of the graph calls into one of the components. So people are like, what else can I do with your pre-configured, you know, backend code? So this is what you can do. If you use the MGT get component, you can supply your own resources. And this is just a graph endpoint, and then give it a version data or v1, and then you can supply your own scope for the graph that you're requesting, and then this is gonna help you make the get calls from the graph using this MGT get component. There's also a lot of other things that you can do if you want to be really creative. You can go to your JavaScript or backend code and using the auth providers that we gave you, and then do, you know, more complicated changes of using the graph. Two more things, and then we're going to move away from the playground. So templating, we showed some examples here as well. So two sections, step back, for the playground. One is all the components and examples per component. And then we started a section called samples as well. So we started collecting all the samples that we build for different content that we've created so far. For example, you know, this one's a fancy one. Like I said, if you wanted to complete your workflow by using the Teams channel picker, I can come here and pick a channel. I wonder if there's anything in it. Maybe benefit? Oh, design? Oh, there it is. So if there's information in your channel, then we're using, you know, MGT get to get all the messages from your teams and then supply a template in order to show, you know, this person up top and then a card for it, and then some more information out, like what they're saying. And if I click on it, I can just respond to one of the messages right away from here. Okay, I think that's enough for MGT Dev. Spent a lot of time on it. I'm gonna go back to my project. Anyways, here's all the things that you can do for, actually, I'm gonna go to my presentation is what I was trying to do. There it is. So moving on. I kind of briefly touched on this earlier. For customizing your own components, a couple things you could do is attributes, properties, and CSS. If you're not familiar with the HTML styles of calling these things, attributes means if you look at the if you look at the examples down below, When you're using JavaScript and selecting your element by giving it a class name, the class name would be a property. And if you're using HTML and then supplying, the alt text width and height for your images, those are called attributes. And CSS custom properties is just shows as below, and the syntax is just dash dash and then the name for it. Going forward. One thing that we thought might be very interesting for people is how to template your own component to add data that's relevant to your projects, and customize, what's showing on your web application. So an example here for templating the agenda item is I can say that I wanted the data type for my template to be event. This is going to get all the events from my agenda components, and then looking at the event data, I could pull in the subject or email addresses or person's image because that's part of the event data. And a good place to find this again is if I go to the documentation and you scroll down, here's where we got the events data. And within it, if you use, some sort of intelligence, or if you import like the graph types, then you would see like what's within events for there as well. And I can show you an example for this. I have a demo prepared for specifically a React application that uses MGT components. We can look at this later. Right here. Going down the list, there's also a lot of different ways that you can templating or using helpers that we build for templates. Another thing is data type. No, not data type. Another thing is like how you can use old data. Data context object in your templates as well. For example, you can do. I wanted to do an if-else type of thing for languages in all the different language in all the languages that I got from the additional details from the person that I got from the graph. If there's more than 0, then I show it. If there's none, then I don't show it. Conditional is data if, data else. I'm sure if you've done some basic programming, you already know what that means. And we gave you some of the templates that's already pre-prepared. So if you say, if there's image, then you show the image. If there's not image, then you just don't and show the person's display name. Coming down, looping that you can use data for. Very simple, easy to remember. MGTGet, we already kind of touched on this. Remember to supply your resources, your version, and your scopes, and you can do also paging with it, and using your own template to show, specific data. And I keep hearing people telling me that it's very important or interesting or convenient. At the bottom, you can see template data type, loading, data type, error. So you don't have to build your own loading and error version of the UI as well. So something to keep in mind. There are 4 types of authentication providers that we have. I showed you earlier in the HTML page for the MSOL provider where you needed to supply the client ID for it. We also have Teams provider, SharePoint provider, and proxy provider. And you can also build your own custom providers in order to use your, like if you already have a project set up and you have your own authentication and your ways of getting the token, then you can custom build your own providers to take advantage of the Graph Toolkit as well as the code that you already built. So I feel like I go through this pretty fast. Let's do the demo for how to use Microsoft Graph Toolkit within your React project. This as well, and go back to roadmaps afterwards. And I'm gonna go to my terminal. So I'm in my demo folder. I created this My React app by using a very simple command, if it's close enough. do what I've done. Oh, there it is. So the default way, I mean, the recommended way of creating your React app is use the create React app command, and then give it a name. If you want to use TypeScript, you supply the template type as TypeScript. So I'm going to cd into that folder. I'm actually going to close this so it doesn't get confused. The default browser always comes up first anyways. It's this. Here you can see all the default files that was created with Create React App. Some source files, some of the manifest stuff that you can use if you decided to publish this. So I'm just gonna go to source file, and here's very default like React project things. Index.tsx is the file that I'm gonna start with. So I already showed you that earlier, about half an hour ago, like how to add the script tag into your HTML page. Now I'm going to show you the other way. So if I do npm install Microsoft MGT is our npm package name. This is going to install the project for me. And then while it's doing that, I'm just going to do import my providers. I know this is going to complain because it's probably not there yet. From, oh, there it is. So it's already installed. And what I can do is use the default or the MSOL providers a similar way and do providers dot global provider equals new MSOL provider, and providing some sort of client ID. And we're going to grab the same one that we created this morning. It's right here. ID. Come back. Drop it in here. And another thing that I was keep running into problem off this morning was supplying the scope. So it doesn't have to do it one by one. So what you could do is set up, your scopes here, and say, if you want user.read. I actually have something prepared, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy it right here. Here's all the scopes that I potentially needed. I'm just going to paste it here. If you know the different types of scopes that you would need in your application, you can also do this to preset up. And in my providers setup, I'm also going to give it the scopes and use the scopes that I just had. Scopes. And this is going to set up my authentication provider using the MSOL library, giving it the client ID that I just used so it knows how to obtain my token and then apply all the scopes that I needed to go to the graph and get all the data. Cool. I'm going to go to, and like you said, underneath here, if you've done React development, this just use like the default app view. So I'm going to go to this. Before that I do anything in the front end, I'm just going to do a npm start. Actually, I'm going to do this in my terminal so that this can always run in the background. So you can see like how the default React little rotator icon look like. Actually, I might have to change my return URL as well, because let's see what the localhost return URL for this is. I don't want to use this browser. Maybe 3000. So if I search for it, it is 3000. So still trying. Okay, here it is. So this is the default React view, and I'm pretty sure that I have to add this back to my return URL for my MCell to work. So if I go back to, is it authentication? Add another URL here, so that my AAD registered app will know how to handle the where to get the token back to, and then come back here. Now that I have a auth provider set up, I'm going to go to my app view and try to add a MGT component to it. So I'm just going to remove all of this. So the React app is going to be gone. And I'm going to add MGT-login. The reason it's complaining about, you know, how it's defined is because we're using like strict mode right now, and it doesn't know like where to find this stuff. So you might ask again, where do I find all the right information? So go back to our documentation, which I closed. No, I didn't. And then if I look at the get started page, scrolling down. Cool. So this is the React section if you're using your like MGT in your React component, but we're actually doing functional components, so some of this, the bottom part might be different. But here it's going to explain to you, you know, TypeScript and TSX and how it's defined. So I'm going to copy this block, go back to my code, edit right here. So now MGT login is actually recognized in my code. Saving it, assuming it's still running. So it looks like there's no errors anymore. I'm going to go back to here, open up my React app. Here it is. So the sign in button showed up. Let's see if it works by trying to sign in with my MS Graph demo account. It looks like it did. It just requested all the permission. And these are the scopes that I supplied along with all my MCell auth provider setup. So if you see one by one, it's like rate your profile, rate the people, rate your contacts, and presence information. Now it doesn't do it multiple times anymore. So here it is, the login button with my account already signed in. If you click it, it's going to show something. It looks like a person card that shows my basic information, and you can sign out an account and sign somebody else in. Coming back to this. So what's the next step? Let's add MGT agenda, like what we did this morning, and see how it looked like within the React scope. It's really hard to talk and code at the same time. I feel like I need two separate brains to work it. It's because I don't have any agenda items. Let me use a different profile. Let me use Megan. Localhost 3000. And then I'm gonna sign in as Megan. Make this bigger. Oh. Click the wrong button. Control Shift Plus. Here it is. Find my Megan account. Here it is. All the agendas that belong to Megan. And if I could, I can go to my own account, the Beth Pan account, to create some calendar items. If we have time, I guess later we can do that. And here's all the agenda items that Megan has, and it shows right here on your view. What do we do next? How about that we show some templating within the React scope. So if you've seen us during build, I feel like we showed 2 different ways of creating or adding templates to your agenda or login or any components that you add in here actually. Normally, when I was doing this the first time, normally what I wanted to do is, I want to do group by day. This is just how, what's it called? Web Components works. And sorry. And the other thing that I wanted to do is a lot of the times that you would want to use the events that attach to these web components that you can just add them right away. So when I was looking at this, and I didn't really know how to use functional components within like React scope, I was like, oh, what if that I just add, event click right here to this component, what's going to happen, but no, not really. You can't really just add it that way. So the React way of doing this is you have to use ref and use effect and use their reference API in order to refer your web components and wrap it into a React components. So for the sake of it, I'm just going to copy it, and then we can see how it look like. This is how it was. So normally what you would want to do is like this, where you use the reference API to create your HTML element that you can refer in your web component down here. And then if you want to add a event listener, for example, the event click belongs to my agenda, then you add it in your use effect and then try to do something fancy with this event. So now if I'm running it, am I still running it? I am still running it. And come back here and I'm going to pull up my console. What I really want to do here is just looking at like when I click it, what's going to happen. So here's the custom event that was logged by attaching an event listener, where you can see the type. It's called event click. And then there's some information that you can get. For example, in the details here, you can see like all the details that we got from Graph, including what's the content of the meeting, like who's part of it, where it would happen, when it would happen, all that kind of stuff. But this took a while for me to research on, like how do I wrap a web components within the React project. So our team actually built something that would make this a lot easier. It's this package. It's called MGT React. So if you do npm install React, this is going to add a lot of the plumbing work for you, so you don't have to write, declaring the components. You don't have to write reference to all the components that you added, because it's the only agenda. What if I wanted to add more? Then you have to attach it every time that you wanted to use a custom event within your web components in the use effect scope. So now that that's added, I'm going to come here and do an import. I think I'm just going to do what we already have, import the login components and the agenda components from the React projects or wrapper that we just showed. And now I don't need any of this. So I can now safely remove the declaration for defining types. I can remove all of this. And what I'm going to do is just add my login component right here. And also add my agenda component right here. Cool. And I think this is just going to show me just the same things. Coming over to Megan's account, refresh, there it is. So what you can do here is, instead of adding all those click event, there's a lot. It's a lot easier for you to attach a click event to this at this point. So what you could do is add, in this agenda event, add a event click. Oh, also gives you all this IntelliSense. I like IntelliSense because I don't have to go back to documents back and forth. And then give it a type. And then I'm going to say sorry, actually I should do this. And then I'm going to say when this event happens, I want the console to log.
Hey everyone, looks like we had a bug with Teams. Gonna just relaunch Teams and get this fixed really quickly.
To that detailed property. So come in here, close this, refresh. In fact, click it. There it is. So every event that I click on, it actually goes into the details and got the event and gave me all this details from Microsoft Graph. Now you can use this to say like, oh, I'm gonna go into body, or I think there's like person. Location is something that people always use, or you could use like start time, so forth and so forth. Okay. What about templating within React? So if I wanted to add my own template here, I can add I'm going to call it event view. And then underneath app, I'll have to define, my event view function. And then that's going to return something. And in the event view, I wanted to show, a subject. So instead of showing, it's because I'm not complete with it. So instead of showing what we just saw in the event view where there's, the title, the event details, what if I wanted to just do it my own way and instead of the default MGT agenda way? So what I could do is I'm going to do agenda. I wanted to group by day. And I'm going to leave the event click there just in case you wanted to peel open the data object again and look at what's in there. And the event view, I'm going to say I need to use my template. In here, I'm going to supply what type of template that we're using. And in the template name here in the details is called event. So I'm just going to put event here. And now I'm going to come down here in my actual event view code and say, I'm going to define event as props. And then now, like, if you've done React development, you always pass down the props from the parent object down to like the other functional components that you created. And we define these props ahead of time as well for the React wrapper. So if you want to put props here, this is going to give you MGT. Hopefully it's going to prompt me template something. Props, there it is. So if I do props dot data context dot event, it's going to give me all the event object and store it in this constant. And then what I wanted to say is I just want to show the subject of all this event first. And then what I can do is get back to this event and then look at, see, now I wish I have IntelliSense, which is the next thing that I wanted to show. So what if I don't know all the things that's within a Microsoft Graph object, such as the event object? How can I do that without going back and forth to the documentation? I can install, it's called Microsoft Graph, what do you call Microsoft-Graph, Microsoft-Graph-types. So by installing this package, I can cast event to something like Microsoft Graph dot event. I don't know why I changed back to small. And I'm going to come here and define it and just say import everything as Microsoft Graph from Microsoft Graph types. Cool. Now let's see if our IntelliSense worked. Yay, look at that. Subject. Cool. No errors, good. So ideally, at this point, now if I go back to my browser, I'm going to show a list of events with only their subjects there. I'll see if that's the case. Oh, there it is. So for Megan, all the subjects has shown up for her with all the meetings that we just saw earlier, and these are grouped by date. What you could also do is adding things like, I have documentation on the other screen, and I'm going back and forth and looking at it. So if I wanted to add, like a show a list of people that's part of the meeting, then I can add a people component from the React wrapper, and then I'm gonna say people query is one of the properties that you can add to it. Queries. I'm just gonna close this real quick, and then you can do event.attendees maybe attendees. And then map all the attendees to a people object. Attendees. And then I'm going to do attendees.email address addresses. This is going to show me what they look like. And then I can add the people object right here, so it's not going to complain. Oh, it's because event.attendees is not defined well. So the reason this is complaining, so TypeScript only, you can cast only the same similar types to similar event. So for the right way to do it is when you're defining event attendees, you're supposed to check if it's empty or if it's a array. So I don't feel like doing that right now, so I'm just going to stop my server, go to TypeScript config, remove strict type, and then restart the server. It comes in here. It should ideally just remove this for me. It doesn't. Hope it does. Let's do a default browser again. So now the server still starting. Sorry, it's gonna take a little bit. 1 second. There it is. Go back here. So there it is. Now we added the people component as part of the event view. So every meeting now is going to show the all the attendees in the event object. I'm going to come back to my code and say like, there's all kinds of things that you can do here within your project. For example, you can change the login components to look and feel as well if you wanted to. But I feel like this is a good place for us to stop for this demo, since we've showed how to add the MGT React wrapper to your React component or React project, how to start a React project if you are new, and we showed you how to use login and agenda components within getting them from the React wrapper, how to use types to cast your local variables to have Microsoft types so that you can have good IntelliSense, where to get the props, and how to define your template as part of your MGT components. And cool. I think that's a good place to stop this demo. All right, I'm going to stop the server and go back to my presentation. It's very strange. This is the first time that I've done like a presentation online where it's broadcasted. So there's like no feedback, like audience feedback. I can't tell if people are confused or not confused. So if you have any questions, I'm depending on all my good moderators um, to help answer those questions. Anyways, we're coming back to the roadmap for our MGT components. Back in 2019 was when we released the 1.0, and that's where we started with a couple components. And then we decided we released 1.1 and 1.2, adding certain functionalities and more providers and more components. Actually, just this past month, we just released 1.3, and the new features including we updated MSOL to 1.3. We added the presence API to our person card, and people and agenda. Anywhere that uses MGT person, you can configure to have presence badge show up. We added a lot of new attributes and templates and samples to both our playground and all of our components. So now that we're done with that, we're actually planning on 2.0. So this is where I need a lot of your help with. We're planning on building a couple more new components. Actually, person card is one of them. I should have had this handy so that I can show you guys. So we're revamping how person card is going to look like. We're adding a lot of more detailed information from the new subsets of data from Substrate and Graph APIs. We're also planning on building a file picker and adding that to our component lists, because that's one of the most requested features from our customers. The other thing is people keep asking, you guys are using the beta version of the Graph API. What if I'm using MGT and Graph in my production application, and I don't want to use any of the beta APIs because of the pace that it's changing? So we're splitting up our core package and the beta package so that people can, use it freely in their different environments between development and production. We're creating theming, like I showed you before in the playground. Dark theme first, and we plan to investigate or research on the front of how many people actually do custom theming. What if we give you, a package of some sort of configuration that you can add your own colors and download it, and so all your components would look like how your own company's UI design would look like. Caching is a very much asked one for the past year or so. And that's front-end caching. People keep asking, like, I'm doing a lot of graph calls and it's very expensive. What if that you can cache some of this information for me so that we don't have to implement it ourselves? So this is one of our, developer experience kind of tasks. By adding caching, we're essentially making our component library into more of a framework, because we're taking a stand on how caching should be done. So that's something, if you're interested in looking at, or like that something that you're already having your project that you think that it's just completely, useless for us to edit, please give that kind of feedback if we should add that. Polling, we already have some of this actually introduced in some of our components as well. So how do we pull data every 5 seconds or 2 seconds from Graph? I can actually show you an example if we have time later on for polling as well. And how do we enable developers to extend the components to build their own? So we're thinking about making our project more granular, so that if you want to create your own MGT components outside of the ones that we already provided, that will be a possibility for 2.0. So backlogs. I'm going to click on this, go to my GitHub and show you our backlogs look like. If you're interested in, what's 2.0, what's coming, what's planned for, this is a good place to look at what we're doing. So if you go to aka.ms/mgt, that will take you to the GitHub repository for our project. And then under projects, here are the things that we're planning for. backlog. Actually, we need to clear this or update this at some point because we just released the last, I think, bug fixes for 1.3. Maybe there's more, I don't know, but 1.3. So here's where you can keep track of everything that we're doing for different components for the playground, for our bugs. Feel free to file your own bugs, or if you would like to, this is very highly appreciated, and we recommend people to do this as well, to fix the problems that you found, or if you feel fancy, you can pick up one of our tasks or build a new component with us. And everybody on the team is more than happy to help you if you want to be a contributor and create pull request with us. I'm going to go back to my keynote. Here's all the information so far that we have on MGT. So the playground is mgt.dev. We're actively working on more samples for the playground as well. If you see something that you would like to play with in the playground, please give us feedback. We're also, since we just released the beta package for MGT React, the next thing that I personally wanted to do for the playground is to add React samples for every components so that people can just go in there and copy paste the code. So, kind of like providing a better developer experience. We started doing a blog series, so AKMS MGT Lab. It's called a lab around Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Very detailed. Let me just show you. Where's my Edge browser? Here it is. If I go to ak.ms mgt lab. We have a very detailed list of how to do certain things step by step, from looking at the component as a whole, and then explain some of the design decisions of why we pick web components, what's the difference between that and Fluent UI, and how we integrate it with some other parts of Microsoft. And then Zero to Hero will show you like very, very detailed steps of how you would go to Azure Active Directory and then register your own app. What are the checkboxes to do? How do you start it from the beginning, like a very low level for beginners? And then from there we go into how to customize. Basically, is my an hour-long presentation blowing into like 7 different articles, and it's very, very helpful. We've gotten great feedback online from our communities for these, especially most of them from like custom components on. Almost every single one of them has a hands-on lab that you can follow. So very good way of learning Microsoft Graph Toolkit. It also goes into details of different providers, which I didn't really touch on in this presentation. How to create your own auth provider with your existing code. How do you use Teams provider and proxy provider and SharePoint provider in order to add your enable your web application to be deployed into different frameworks. 2 more coming, that one is with React and the other one is with Angular. We actually have similar examples built for these 2 samples. So you will see like 2 completely different ways of using boilerplate React projects and boilerplate Angular projects, and how to add MGT into those projects and do similar things with them. I do have to prop for all of our authors. I didn't write them all. We had a lot of community help from our MVPs and friends and partners from within the company. So a lot of help from different people. So again, if you want to learn, in a more detailed way, and I know people learn differently. Some people are visual, some people read documentations. This is a good place for you to go and learn more about Graph Toolkit. Documentation is at mgt-docs. Our repository is at MGT, and if you want to ask questions on Stack Overflow, make sure that you tag Microsoft-Graph-Toolkit so that we get notifications and go check it out in time and respond to you. That's all the information that I have for Graph Toolkit. Hope you guys had a good time.
I know, Beth. It's always difficult to kind of tie things up, but you've been a superstar. This has been amazing, especially the React demos. They went really deep, and somebody like me, I'm more on the Angular side of things. It was
Yeah.
still a lot of cool stuff that I'd never seen before. So thank you so much for coming in, showing us everything. If anybody has a question, they can always email us at msusdev@microsoft.com. If we can't get an answer for you, we'll get it to the right people answered. Beth, you shared a lot of links. We put it all in the chat. And to everyone attending, we're going to be live again next Thursday. We're going to talk about msal.js, and we're going to talk about how we use the token from there to connect to Azure services such as Azure Storage, Azure SQL Database, and Azure Cognitive Services. So we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to keep things rolling on our unofficially named Mixer Farewell Tour. So thank you again, Beth. Thank you again. Thank you to everybody who attended, and we will see
Thank you
you
for
all.
having me.
Awesome. We'll see you all next week.